Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Proverbs chapter 22, but only verses 1 through 16. We've been working our way through that central section, the Proverbs of Solomon, chapters 10 through 24, and we subdivided that into three sections, and we're coming to the end of the second section, living the wise life. And next time we'll be coming back to look at the words of the wise, which notice it starts halfway through chapter 22, so we're only going to go up to verse 16. We begin chapter 22, verse 1. A good name is to be more desired than great wealth. Now, our topic also already is the topic of wealth, but notice it's also going to be moral instruction. It's not just wealth and how to get it, but it's wealth and what to do about it. You can get wealth, and there's some lessons in the Proverbs on how to succeed. Not necessarily how to get, overly filthy rich, but how to succeed in life. And but notice he's saying something is better, a good name, and our translators added the word good, but that's the idea here. When they say a name, um, that's the idea of honor. So that's to be more desired than great wealth. Favor is better than silver and gold. So just in keeping with the wealth theme here. And yet favor, a name, a reputation, that's actually something that's better. You can't buy that. You have to earn that. Verse 2, the rich and the poor have a common bond. Here's the common bond. The Lord is the maker of them all. Um, he makes the rich people, he makes the poor people. Somebody asks, well, why does he make so many poor? That's up to him. Although I can't help but think of that passage in First Corinthians chapter 1 that talks about how there were not many mighty, many noble, many wise, and can I add to that maybe many rich who were called? God delights in pouring out his blessing upon the poor. And so, notice you have a good name, and the Lord is maker of them all. These are good things. Verse 3, the prudent sees the evil and hides himself, but the naive go on and are punished for it. When you see bad things, go the other way. When you see that which could bring you to ruin, and and the person that doesn't know any better, they just go blindly into the face of trouble, and they suffer the result from it. Verse 4, the reward of humility and the fear of the Lord are riches, honor, and life. So notice humility and the fear of the Lord, those have been the topics throughout the book of Proverbs from its beginning all the way up to the present. And these are real riches, honor, and life. Verse 5, thorns and snares are in the way of the perverse. He who guards himself will be far from them. And then in verse 6, train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Now remember, these are general principles. That's not to say they never have an exception. That doesn't mean that you can train up a child and in the way he should go, and at some future date he might rebel against the training that he received. Yes, those sorts of things happen, but that's not the rule. Generally speaking, you train up a child in the way he should go, and he's going to continue on that route. Lessons of your youth come back in your adulthood. Sometimes the lessons you didn't even think you were paying attention to at the time, but they sink in. They have a way of sinking in and and going with you to the end of your days. Verse 7, and we're still continuing on the theme of wealth and moral instruction. The rich rules over the poor. That's just the way things are in the world. Even today, people that are wealthy tend to have more influence than people that don't have much in the way of funds. They have time to do with it, and they can actually generate some influence with their money. Sometimes I jokingly, and I'm not, there's a little bit of seriousness here, that we have the best justice and the best government that money can buy. Um, and like somebody said, we have the best politicians that money can buy. But the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower becomes the lender's slave. Now that's an outgrowth of the first line, where in the ancient world that actually would take place, where someone who borrowed and then could not repay could be taken and sold into slavery. Now, the Jews weren't supposed to be doing that sort of thing, although somebody might do it so as not to renege on a debt. They'd say, look, I'm going to work for you then. Maybe not a slave in the same sense that slavery was throughout the rest of the world, but they were going to be working for someone, and that other person would get all of the proceeds. So the borrower becomes the lender's slave. Even today, it's a good idea. Let me just say, it's a good idea if you can avoid going into debt, or at least avoid going into debt when you don't have the wherewithal to repay it, or to, for example, if you buy a house. Very few people I know can actually take the money from their bank and just buy a house outright. Usually, that's a bank affair, but then you have the house to show for it. So if bad things happen, you can always turn around and sell the house and make back the money. Hopefully, if things haven't gone all messed up with regard to the economy, and I know those things happen too. Verse 8: He who sows iniquity will reap vanity, and the rod of his fury will perish. This is the idea that we see in Galatians chapter 6, where Paul says, what you sow, that will you also reap. That's a spiritual lesson, but it's also a physical lesson too. It just takes place in the world. Verse 9: He who is generous will be blessed, for he gives some of his food to the poor. Notice he's not being blessed necessarily by the poor, but he's blessed in a different way. I think he's blessed by the Lord, and the Lord loves those and calls for us to benefit the poor, to give that some of that which we have to the poor. Verse 10: Drive out the scoffer. We're turning to the idea of speech, things that you say. So drive out the scoffer, and contention will go out. Even strife and dishonor will cease. There's something about the one that's always mocking others and situations and things like that. And that doesn't mean we can't laugh, but this is the scoffer that's causing contention and strife and dishonor. Verse 11: He who loves purity of heart and whose speech, there's the speech theme, whose speech is gracious, the king is his friend. If you learn to control your tongue, you can go a long way. And notice, he who loves purity of heart and whose speech is gracious. Notice how those two, this isn't the story of somebody who says one thing but is really thinking another. No, this is one who is speaking gracious words out of his heart. And he's going to go a long way. Even the king will be his friend. Verse 12: The eyes of the Lord preserve knowledge, but he overthrows the words of the treacherous man. See how speech sort of threads the needle through these verses. And so, the Lord, he preserves knowledge, but he overthrows the words of the treacherous man. And those words might be his plans, those might be his teachings, what he says, but the Lord will come out on top. Verse 13: The sluggard, and this is still things that you say. Usually, when we think of the sluggard, that's the lazy person. We're looking at what he does or what he does not do. In this case, he says, there is a lion outside. I will be killed in the streets. Now, what's going on here? Frankly, if there was a lion outside, I don't think I'd want to go outside. But that's not what's happening here. This is the sluggard saying this. He's using this as an excuse. Let me just say, there were lions in the Middle East back then. There aren't any today. They have all been chased out or died out. You find lions in other parts of the world, not in the Middle East. But at that time, you could find lions out there. But he's using this as an excuse. I'll be killed in the streets. Lions weren't usually on the street. They were out in the wild. And so I'll be killed in the street. That's an excuse. I can stay indoors. I can stay in bed. I can just goof off today. Verse 14: The mouth of an adulteress, again, this is things you say, the mouth of an adulteress is a deep pit. He who is cursed of the Lord will fall into it. And so listening to that, can I call her the wayward woman? Listening to her enticements, there's all sorts of danger there. And that's a graphic portrayal, picturing her mouth as a deep pit and someone falling into it. Verse 15: Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. Now, we already talked about raising up a child in the way he should go. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of discipline will remove it far from him. And so verses 10 through 14 have been what you say. But now in verse 15 is what is in the heart. Notice it's bound up in the heart of the child because what you say comes out of the heart, and yet there's a way to remove, to change the heart from the outside in. Yes, there is, in the way we raise our children, in the way sometimes we discipline our children. It's not just discipline, but that's part of it. That's part of the story. We can train up a child so that he has his heart being developed in the way that it should go. Verse 16, he who oppresses the poor. Now that's a bad thing. And notice he oppresses the poor to make more for himself. He's out there to make a profit. So he oppresses the poor, or who gives to the rich. Notice the one who oppresses the poor. You get the rest of the line. Will only come to poverty. But he's doing it to make more for himself. And one who gives to the rich. Why is he doing that? Well, frankly, it's for the same reason. He gives to the rich to try to make more for himself. He's trying to curry the favor of the rich so that the rich will give some of his riches to him. This is really the same story, whether he's oppressing the poor to profit from it or he's giving to the rich to profit from it. Neither one's going to work. Neither one is going to be fruitful.